After reading over 500 books on filmmaking, the book that I wish I had on these shelves when I started out as a filmmaker, the one that would have helped me out the most, has yet to be written. And that is not to say that none of these books are any good. To the contrary, there are some great books here that provide great filmmaking insight, a lot of them written by film school instructors. But not every filmmaker can afford to go to film school or even wants to go. But every filmmaker can find a way to afford these top 10 recommended books on filmmaking. So here are my top 10 recommended books for aspiring filmmakers. Number 1, The Visual Story by Bruce Bloch. Number 2, Sight, Sound, Motion by Herbert Zettel. Number 3 is a series of books, Master Shots, Volume 1 through 3 by Christopher Kenworthy. Number 4, Basic Cinematography by Kurt Lancaster. Number 5, Cinematic Storytelling by Jennifer Van Sigel. Number 6, The Innocence of the Eye by Ed Spiegel. Number 7, Making Movies Work by John Borston. Number 8, The Filmmaker's Eye by Gustavo Mercado. Number 9, Evoke, Perception, Knowing, and Feeling in Film by Michael Milton. And number 10, Film Directing Fundamentals by Nicholas Preferis. But why these books? Of the 500 plus books on filmmaking that I have, why are these my top 10? In the coming weeks, I will be going into detail about why these books come highly recommended. Today, I will be going into detail about one of these books. In a nutshell, if you want to take your filmmaking to the next level, you have to understand the visual language. That is, how to use the camera to communicate visually. Your audience should be able to watch your film with the volume turned down and still understand what is happening. Alfred Hitchcock refers to this as pure cinema. The visual language was created out of necessity during the silent film era. Early filmmakers had to learn how to communicate visually because with silent film, they had no other choice. At least, no other choice until sound was introduced in 1927. Cinema took a step back when sound was introduced because a lot of filmmakers relied on dialogue to tell the story as opposed to relying on the visuals, what Hitchcock called photographs of people talking. And that's where Bruce Bloch's seminal book, The Visual Story, comes in. Out of these 10 books, if I had to recommend only one book for the understanding of the visual language, The Visual Story would be that book. The Visual Story was the first book that I found on filmmaking that explained how to communicate visually. Bloch introduces the concept of visual structure. He begins by explaining the principle of contrast and affinity, and then explains the concepts of visual progression and visual intensity. He then introduces the visual components of visual structure: space, line, shape, tone, color, movement, and rhythm. He then goes into detail outlining and explaining each one of these visual components, providing plenty of examples. All films are made up of these visual components of space, line, shape, tone, color, movement, and rhythm. Bloch then outlines how to apply visual structure to your story structure. I began studying this book in earnest around 2012. After reading The Visual Story, I thought that was all there was to know about the visual language. That is, until I had to apply the visual components to a short film I was prepping for production. Because I had yet to understand the concept of story subtext, I was applying the visual components to the text of the script, to the external narrative. Few people ever mentioned the internal narrative, and fewer still described what it was. And no one mentioned subtextual analysis. As a side note, director-cinematographer Alex Buono put out his The Art of Visual Storytelling training series, and he goes into great detail about what visual structure is. Bruce Bloch was one of his teachers when he was attending film school. A segment of Buono's training series was called Visual Structure, and it was released on DVD. But something happened and it was taken off the market. Once I found out about it, I went to the extremes to find a copy of it on DVD. After weeks of searching high and low, even writing to Alex Buono directly, I finally found a used copy of the DVD offered for sale. And it's a shame that it is no longer offered for sale. This is the perfect companion to Bloch's book on the visual story, and I treasure this DVD. In his follow-up training series, The Art of Visual Storytelling 2, Buono does go into detail on visual subtext, explaining what it is and giving examples of its use. It needs to be understood that the visual components are subtextual tools and should be used to visually convey the story's subtext. The subtext of your story is the meaning of your story. If your story has no subtext, it literally has no meaning. Learning how to visually communicate the subtext of your story is your first step to becoming an effective and intentional filmmaker. But if you don't know how to analyze your script for its subtext, the visual language becomes essentially meaningless. The key is in understanding the internal narrative of your script through the process of subtextual analysis. Once you know your story's subtext, you can then use the visual components effectively to convey your story's subtext. This is filmmaking from the inside out. I have a free book detailing the process of subtextual analysis for film directors available at the link in the description below. If you are interested in learning more about the visual language, like and subscribe to this channel. I will be sharing much more filmmaking from the inside out.